Hi, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of Explicitly Pro-Life. I'm Kristan Hawkins. Thanks for tuning in this week. I'm really excited. Today we have a new guest on, someone who's never been on Explicitly Pro-Life before, Isabel Brown. Isabel is coming to us from Arizona, from the Turning Point USA headquarters, where she serves as spokeswoman for Turning Point. Thanks, Isabel, for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me, Kristan.
Yeah, it's really good to have this conversation with you. I am sorry you had to get up so early to film, though. I am very sorry for that. The sometimes time differences don't always work in your favor when you're out on the West Coast, but you get to be in Arizona, which is lovely. So
true.
I don't feel bad. Okay, so you serve as spokesperson for Turning Point. You're traveling to college campuses, but you've also released your own book. And I really want to talk about this book, Frontlines, Finding My Voice on American college campus, because you kind of got started into politics, I would say, from kind of a different way. You were studying biomedical science. You're pre-med, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So you were pre-med at Colorado State University, Fort Collins, which is, crazy liberal. You ended up going to Georgetown for your master's. So you obviously know about the development of the preborn human being and all about that. But then you ended up becoming spokesperson for this very right conservative youth organization. So how did that happen? And do you describe that in your book? Or I just find that fascinating because I kind of came into the pro-life movement with a similar, like I wanted to get a degree in aeronautical engineering. And then I started volunteering for a pregnancy center. And then instantly, like, everything changed. And I want to know, like, how did you change and what happened in your life?
That's the $1 million question to my story, Kristan. And honestly, if you had told me a few years ago we would be sitting down recording this podcast, I would have thought you were absolutely insane. I never had any intention of working in politics or communications or as a spokeswoman for anything, let alone a large conservative organization. And I was always personally interested in politics as a hobby, but my passion and my dream was found in the hard sciences, because ever since I can remember, since I was a young child, I have loved the pursuit of objective truth that you find in the hard sciences and researching things to understand what we know we can prove versus what we know is fantasy and filtering between fact and fiction. And I loved this idea of using that pursuit to help people and help humanity in so many ways. So my dream was to become a trauma surgeon. And being from the state of Colorado, I decided to attend the big research institution up the road at Colorado State University, knowing that it had somewhat of a connotation for being a pretty conservative environment. Traditionally, it was a very big agricultural school, and I called it that school up the road, and avoided applying to CU Boulder at all costs, knowing that I probably would never be able to find a community of people that shared my values there. And really, from the moment after the 2016 election, that next morning on my college campus, I discovered the exact opposite in my community, that objective truth was not a value, even in my classes like anatomy and chemistry and physiology, and that instead leftist indoctrination and complete intolerance toward and attack toward conservative ideas, Christian values, and even objective truth was really what was going to define the culture of my college campus. So yes, we spent so much time studying every tiny miracle that has to happen in the womb for a baby to even make it to 9 months of viability in its mother's womb, when tiny fingerprints are formed and when a baby can feel pain before it's even born while it's in the womb, only to be told at the end of a unit in my physiology class that a fetus in the womb actually was not a baby or a human being, and termination of a pregnancy had nothing to do with ending a unique biological life. And it was so shocking to me, as someone who'd always been a conservative, who always believed in this idea of objective truth and reality being a steadfast foundation for our society, seeing that under attack in all of my classes. So how did I end up here is a great question. Really, I just felt so alone in my classes, in academic settings on campus, but especially outside of class as well, in extracurriculars, from student government and my job in the admissions office, where I was frequently called a racist or a white supremacist or a bigot or a Nazi, you name it, for doing something not all that controversial, raising my hand and saying, I disagree, and here's why. And wanted an outlet for that, wanted to create a community, knowing that even though I felt like the only conservative in a sea of 30,000 people, chances are, statistically speaking, I was not the only one. And around that time, received a targeted Facebook ad for the Turning Point USA Young Women's Leadership Summit, which is an annual conference we put on for young high school and college conservative women in Dallas, Texas, a phenomenally fun event that I would highly suggest any woman listening to this podcast go to. And from moment one, completely fell in love with the conservative movement, with Turning Point USA. I knew nothing about what I was getting into. In fact, had to Google who Charlie was when he went on stage to start the whole thing, which is a story we love to tell now. But went back to my college campus and started a Turning Point USA chapter, getting the conservative voice out there and starting a campus conversation in my community about changing your mind and new perspectives and starting to challenge the narrative on campus with just opening your mind to new possibilities and new ways of thinking.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to have you on this season, we're kind of in this season of having difficult conversations. And so I feel like you have a lot of experience having these difficult conversations now as spokesperson at Turning Point USA, but then what you experienced when you were in college, which kind of led you to write this book of what your life was like on campus. Because I think for so many young pro-lifers, we can learn facts and science, and we can learn philosophy. We can learn tips for how to persuade and, how to be the best apologist for our, human rights issue. But then you also just have to be willing to be brave and courageous. And like you said, raise your hand and say you disagree, or be willing to speak up and start a group or host a speaker or a different type of event on your campus. When you were on campus, what were some of you mentioned early, at the beginning, about being in an anatomy class. Do you remember other specific examples where there was just flat out indoctrination occurring?
Oh, absolutely. And there's literally countless examples in my book from classes that I was personally in at Colorado State or that my friends were involved in. But really, there was a complete intolerance toward questioning a political narrative, but also advocating for one's religious beliefs, or even just starting to ask questions about how the biological reality of what we were learning didn't line up with what our professors were saying. For example, what I just mentioned about fetal development in the womb and what that process looked like. I had one professor, for example, my senior year, begin the entire course for the whole semester in the first 20 minutes, and excuse my language for this, but saying that our president at the time, Trump, was a dipshit and the worst president we've ever had when it comes to public health. And then he went on to say that Democrats care about everyone and Republicans only care about some people, verbatim. And at this point, I was expecting my professors to go off the rails. So I was in a bit of a habit of recording my professors in class every day, knowing that things would probably be said that were completely not okay. In a different class, in science, you're judged very much on multiple choice exams and the right answer and the wrong answer. In eukaryotic cellular biology, I had to choose as a wrong answer on a multiple choice exam that God created the universe when asked, how did the universe originate? Instead, the correct answer was that all life originated from a single cell billions of years ago, just because. That's just what we know is true. And the idea that something bigger could be out there, that God could have possibly had a hand in that process, was actually wrong. You would have missed the question and had a lower grade on the assignment. Those are in classes that politics should not remotely be part of the conversation, or differing religious ideology should not remotely be part of the conversation. But essentially, they back scientific students, people who are going to be our next doctors, nurses, PAs, people working in laboratories, people working in the public health field as well, into a corner saying God can't possibly be real. That's been disproven by science, that conservatives are anti-science somehow, and the only way to be a true scientist is to embrace these lies of socialism and leftism, and that truth has now gone out the window. Instead, everything is relative and subjective based on the political narrative of the day.
So back up. You said you recorded your professors?
I sure did. Yes. And people get surprised when they hear that. And I think it's one of the biggest tricks up conservative students' sleeves today, and even pro-life students on campus up their sleeve, because in many states, including my home state of Colorado and where I went to school, it's a one-party consent state. So what does that mean? It means that your professor doesn't need to know when you pull out your phone to record the class. And particularly in 2021, when everything is on Zoom and being recorded anyway, it's never been easier to expose what's happening inside the classroom and expose what your professor is saying and get that out there. The only way to hold these people accountable is to reveal what's happening inside the classroom and to make sure that that story makes it to the light. So utilize that opportunity, utilize programs like our Turning Point USA Professor Watch List, and get your professor's story out there to make sure that that indoctrination never happens again.
Did you ever, when you were there, release recordings of some of these outlandish things professor said?
Not while I was a student. Truthfully, I had a lot of bravery and courage as a student, but I didn't really know what to do with all of that information at the time, right? I wasn't wildly involved with politics or media or the conservative movement, but I knew eventually I wanted to do something with all of that information. And during my last semester of college was when I started writing my book, wanting to remember everything, all of my experiences on campus, how I reacted to those things, and of course, the most outlandish things that my professors said in class. But this wasn't just happening from professors. This was a targeted effort to indoctrinate students from the highest level of my campus administration. And being very involved in student government, I got to know our administration quite well, including the university chancellor and president, all of the vice presidents, and discovered that according to them, and this was actually in a conversation I had with one of these people, their goal for Colorado State University was not education and to prepare students to be very well functioning, successful adults in the real world. It was actually to become the next social justice institution in America. They wanted CSU, or Colorado State, to essentially be known as the next Mizzou. That was their dream. And they would go to pretty much any lengths necessary to make that happen. And as a student, this was so frustrating because I was having these conversations and I wanted to get it out there, but I didn't know how to get the story out there. I didn't have connections with big media outlets and things that could make videos go viral or get the story out there very well. So after graduation was really when I started making that transition to the social media and public speaking side of things. And a great example of how I was successful in doing that, but truthfully, I didn't need to wait until I graduated. I could have done this earlier on, was the summer after graduation, I exposed a story called the Inclusive Language Guide at CSU. And this really blew up on national media headlines. Everybody was tweeting about it, including Ronna McDaniel, the chairwoman of the RNC. Turns out mean words are such a big problem on my alma mater's campus that all of our administration had to focus on ridding our environment from mean bullies and mean words that made people feel offended and not included in our community. Not a single student was consulted for this project. So this was the administration telling students what they were offended by. And in this 10-page document, yes, it was that long, were very common words or phrases that were now banned from our experience because they wanted to make sure that we were a social justice environment. Apparently, you may not know this, food coma is racist. The term food coma is racist against African Americans because it perpetuates a stereotype of laziness. Or you're no longer allowed to say long time no see because allegedly it originally made fun of how Asian Americans spoke English. Insane. There's no logic to these explanations whatsoever.
I'm sorry, is food coma a term only Black people use?
I have no idea. I mean, these are things that I would have never heard of until I read this document. And honestly, they easily could have just made up the explanations on all of these terms and phrases because it's ridiculous. But they even went so far, Kristan, as to say that the word America should be banned from our college campus because if we referred to the United States as America and just that one word, we insinuated that other countries in North and South America were not as good as the United States, that we were a better country than them, and how dare we suggest that. This is a federally funded public land grant institution in Colorado that's receiving tax dollars from people all across the United States of America to fund the research programs that I was a part of as a biomedical sciences student. these stories happen every single day, not just on my college campus or at Harvard or at Berkeley or Stanford, the places that you would expect it, but places in Kansas and Nebraska and Texas and all of these states that we wouldn't expect indoctrination to go so far.
Yeah, I'm surprised like the word fetus wasn't banned, because wouldn't that be, I mean, it's, you want to think about dehumanizing words that are used every day in abortion facilities and with the abortion left. The word fetus, even though it's a perfectly fine word, it's just a stage of development, is used as to dehumanize the preborn child, the
that is
human being in the womb. It's just a fetus. It's just a blob of tissue. It's not human. Did you, when you said earlier about how you were in this anatomy class and they were describing to you, you know, the intricacies of the development of the human person, and then, you know, went out of their way at the end to say, but don't worry, but it's not really human. Did you or anybody in the class like say anything to that professor? Like, wait a minute, you just said it's a human being, but now you're saying it's not a human being?
If anybody listening has ever been in a science class, you know how fast-paced these environments are. And honestly, it was so shocking to me that the narrative completely flipped on its head that quickly that I remember distinctly taking notes in this class and hearing that from my professor and looking up to kind of look around and think, hang on a second, what did you really just say that? But I truly was the only student in that class who even thought to pick my head up and look around and wonder. Everyone else kept their head down, kept diligently scribbling to keep up with the professor as quickly as possible and memorize as much for the test as they possibly could so that it would save their grade and their GPA. But it's a scary thing to question your professor, especially when that individual holds so much power over your GPA, your opportunities to go to medical school, and your professional future as well. So I understand why most people prefer to keep their head down. But when we do that, that's when such widespread indoctrination happens. Yeah. That's when these lies become truth, and people really do sit through months of learning about fetal development to honestly, at the end, believe that someone is just a clump of cells when they're in the womb and they're not actually a human being, despite everything that they've learned for the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I guess my question is, with everything that what you saw and personally endured on campus, what you're seeing now on campuses as you travel with Turning Point, what are some of the best ways you think that pro-life young people, you know, whether in their high school or they're in college or even in, you know, med or law school and some sort of graduate setting, what are some of the best ways you think they should consider speaking out in a way that won't, you know, kill their GPA?
That's the caveat to that, right? And that's why people are so afraid to speak out, because there is retaliation associated with that far too commonly, especially in the graduate professions as well, in the graduate school settings, which is why you see all of this in med school and nursing school and PA programs as well today, just to name a few. We'll start with this. Being a pro-life advocate is honestly the hardest thing that you can possibly be in higher education and academia settings today. There is an infrastructure for pro-life students, but the hatred that the left has towards the abortion conversation in general, and just completely willing to do anything to shut it down at the onset, is so powerful, unlike anything I've ever seen before. And you are literally considered the devil incarnate on college campuses if you dare to advocate for the unborn and the people in our society who are the most vulnerable and need us to speak up because they don't have a voice themselves. The irony of that is disgusting and honestly should make anyone sick. But truthfully, you are the evil person if you're advocating for what's good and right and true, and for our most vulnerable and marginalized in society. So the first thing I would like to say is it's difficult, and I get that. So when we ask you guys to speak up, and if you're listening to this thinking, wow, that sucks, I really don't want to, get targeted and be called all of these horrible things, we get it. And if anybody gets it, it's me. I lived through it as a student, and apparently I loved being targeted so much on campus that I decided to do it professionally every single day after graduation. We know what we're asking you to do, and it may involve getting some crazy labels tacked onto your name or reputation. Sometimes it may involve a failing grade on an assignment or retaliation from your professor. Sometimes your friends might walk away from your relationship because they can't handle the courage and bravery of what it means to get your name and your face out there to make a difference for the next generation, literally, so that they can even be born in the United States of America. But it relies on all of us. And with Turning Point USA, we like to say all the time that we truly are in the midst of a culture war. When we say that, it's not metaphorical. It's not us being hyperbolic to sound very poetic and get money from donors or try to make sure our organization continues to grow. The ideological battles on college campuses go with students after they graduate. And that's what's driving policy in Congress today and corporate boardroom conversations and literally burning down our society, as we saw last summer with BLM Inc. and Antifa setting fire to American cities to make way for complete government control. And make no mistake about it, that will include abortion being at the forefront of the agenda for the political left today. When you do choose to speak up on your campus and you embrace just a few seconds of courage and bravery at a time, I can tell you it's not rocket science. And I've never taken a rocket science class, but I've taken a lot of science classes, including organic chemistry, which I would argue is a lot more difficult than some rocket science classes. And it really boils down to one very simple thing. And it's the same thing that I think you and I get to do every day, Kristan, and that's tell people the truth. It's that simple every day. And it doesn't have to be a grand gesture. It doesn't have to be to tens of thousands of people all at once or on national television. Sometimes literally it's raising your hand in class for 5 seconds and telling your professor, you know, that doesn't sound right to me. And here on my phone or on my computer, I have data and statistics that can prove that wrong. So what's your response to that? Or even just asking a simple question of, hang on, if we walked through all these steps of how a baby can feel pain in the womb and that it has unique DNA or its own fingerprints and it has a heartbeat, how is that a clump of cells? Please explain this to me from a scientific perspective. Maybe it's running for student government as an outspoken pro-life advocate and encouraging more people to get out there and make their voices heard, or sitting in your living room or your dorm room recording a 30-second conversation with the people that follow you on social media, talking about the latest crazy thing on your college campus and why you're not okay with that. If I've learned anything through my time of being a campus activist and now choosing to do this professionally and being a spokesperson traveling all across the country to see our students on college campuses, it's that most of the time, some people just need someone else to be the first person to raise their hand, to set up a table on campus and hand them a flyer that tells them the truth about something, the first person to invite a speaker to campus that challenges the narrative. And it really is that simple. If you're willing to put your name out there for just a few seconds at a time, one question at a time in class, one tweet at a time, or one video on Instagram at a time, you really will inspire an entire generation of people to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, this is I was telling my husband the other day, I said, if I feel like if I was in college today, I would probably have been expelled. And I was lucky to go to a college where it was very small. And by the time I got to college, I decided I wanted to abolish abortion in my lifetime. So I was in like the pre-law track. I stupidly thought becoming a lawyer would solve things. It's not how it works. But it was interesting because my classes were very small. And so I actually had a lot of opportunities to debate my professors. And it was a different environment. It was early 2000s, and professors would say, well, does anyone here disagree? Or once they knew me and I was in the classroom, they'd say, well, Kristan, what's your response to this? You know, or one time I was in a classroom and it was a kind of it was like a political philosophy class. And we were talking about, you know, if the person's on the side of the road, they're in a lot of pain. You've gotten in this terrible car accident. You've gotten yourself out. You've gotten them out of the car, but there's nothing you can do to save this person's life. Surely the most merciful thing you can do is to end their life. Yeah. And I'm trying to think how it came up in a political philosophy class, but it was there. And then the professor who was my advisor looked over at me and she was like, so what's your response to this, Kristan? And it was hard because I would get called on, but I knew going into class, if George Bush said something on TV the night before, I better know what he said, the context of that it was taken in, because I was going to have to defend it. And I think that's very important. And I still do feel like there are some professors out there who can disagree, but disagree politely, or disagree and still, won't punitively take action against you for having, the ability to disagree with them. And I think you kind of need to navigate personally as a student on campus to find those professors. Is this a professor who I can disagree with? And are they going to take it well? Or is this a professor who will do everything in their power to harm my grade and my GPA after this? And I do think that's an important distinction you kind of have to make when you're on campus, and when you're having these relationships, and you're seeking these relationships with professors. I think you have to be a little bit smart about what you're doing. I think it's very key what you said about recording your professors. And if you're in a one-party consent state, you can Google one-party consent states. Majority of places are actually one-party consent states, to be able to record, because then we can expose that behavior. Or if you do get a bad grade at the end of the term, you could go back to the administration and say, this is what was said in class. This is what I said. This is what the professor said. And then look at the grade I got, on my paper. And so I think that's a good backup plan and an insurance plan for you. So I definitely think there's ways for you as a conservative, as a pro-life student, to speak up, disagree, but I think you have to be strategic about it. You have to be smart about it. And obviously, I'm not even getting into everything fun you can do on campus: starting groups, joining groups, running for student council, student body, SGA, whatever you call it, hosting events, and all the extracurriculars that you can do to kind of counter the indoctrination that's happening right there in class. But I do think there's a way you can stand up, and sometimes you might approach the professor after the class and say, you kind of made this quip earlier, and maybe it would have been rude for you to interrupt their, tirade or whatever they were doing. But I wanted to just tell you, I disagree with what you said here. And let me tell you why. And maybe the next time you want to say that, let's have a class discussion about that. I'd be happy to express my pro-life beliefs. But I definitely think there's ways for you to do it. So don't get discouraged if you're on campus that there's nothing you can do. I think everyone needs to get your book, Isabel. Read it, read your kind of war stories that you've lived through, because I think there is some camaraderie once you realize somebody else has lived through this before, to say, oh, Isabel did it, Kristan did it, I can do it, and I can stand up and speak truth with love on my campus. And I think that's also very important when we're talking specifically about the pro-life issue. When it comes to the conservative movement, when I was, arguing about conservative economic philosophy, I can just be like, no, you're an idiot, and this is why. And let me tell you, and let me, show you the statistics on this. But with abortion, it's always so much more loaded, because we don't know who we're talking to. The professor we're talking to could have had an abortion or could have paid for an abortion. The people sitting in class right now, there might be a girl who's sitting next to you in class who's experiencing an unplanned pregnancy and might be thinking about having an abortion. So you always have to be so careful when we're talking about abortion, even if we do want to call someone an idiot. Not supposed to do that, because you're not going to win them over to your side, and we're not going to be speaking the truth in love, knowing that there might be somebody next to us who's deeply wounded and hurt from what our culture of death has told them is compassion and is real empowerment, which we all know is not. Isabel, do you have any final thoughts for, one, everyone needs to know how to follow you and where to get your book, but what are your final thoughts for this generation? I've been very encouraged lately because Gen Z, is polling so much more conservative than Gen Y, the millennials, on a lot of issues. I still think overall we have a major brand problem within the pro-life movement, within the conservative movement. Even though people might agree with our ideas, our philosophy, they're unwilling to attach that name or label to themselves because of what the mainstream media and the left media tells them we are. So do you have any final thoughts for those on campus who want to speak out and who want to have these difficult conversations to change minds and, for us, save some babies' lives?
I'll start with how you guys can connect with me. You can follow me on social media at the Isabel Brown. It's just my first name, last name. Really easy to find me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. You can buy my book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It's really easy to find.
Now.
There's Prime shipping for now. Everyone says it's still available on Amazon, and I'm like, so far.
Books, let me just a little quick. I have been buying books off Amazon left and right because I am terrified. And I guess this is a brilliant strategy on their part because I'm the stupid one buying from them and giving them more money. But I've been buying these books. Like, so my friend Carter Sneed did When Harry Met Sally. Oh, no, sorry. Ryan Anderson did Harry Met Sally. And then Carter Sneed, professor at Notre Dame, just did a case for the body. It's what it means to be human. It's like this great pro-life book. And so I've been buying these books up because I'm terrified that they're going to take them down. So get Isabel's book before Amazon tears it down.
So far, it's still on Amazon, and it's an Amazon bestseller too. So you guys are definitely helping it get out there and get the voice out there. In terms of some words of encouragement, I think I love what you said, Kristan, about a branding problem. And that's so true, because on college campuses, conservatism and being pro-life has all of a sudden become this euphemism for evil, that you're intolerant, that you hate anyone who's different from you, or you hate any person of color, and you hate women. I mean, you hate all of these people. And I did a news hit yesterday with Newsmax where we actually watched a video of a professor from Syracuse doing a Zoom event saying verbatim that conservatism is a euphemism for white supremacy and white rage. So this is literally what students are being taught every day, and it's no different from the pro-life conversation and message as well. If you're a pro-lifer, you hate women, you don't want them to be empowered, you don't want them to succeed or have a great career, and you want them to be backed into a corner and feel like they have no options. Obviously, we know that none of that is true, but the left has been so good and so successful for decades at marketing their cause in an uplifting and empowering and loving and exciting and youthful and energizing way. So that's the cool thing to do, because that's normal. It means you love everyone. It means that you're a good person if you side with the left on campus. There's a very unique opportunity right now with Generation Z, which we call Gen Free at Turning Point USA, because we are so overwhelmingly conservative and pro-life, to get our message across in the same exciting, energizing, uplifting, empowering, and fun way that the left has been doing for so long. But the only way to do that is by courageously and proudly sharing what you believe in every day with your life. So if you're listening to this and maybe you've kept your head down for a while on your college campus, or you're not really sure where to begin, sometimes it literally just starts with putting a socialism sucks or pro-life generation button on your backpack, or raising your hand in class one time in the entire semester, and just encouraging other students to start asking the right questions, or sharing one video on your social media from Students for Life or from an organization like Turning Point USA to get the truth out there to someone, even if it's just one other person in your community. When we decide to make it cool and make it progressive and empowering and uplifting to be conservative and to be pro-life again in this country, that's when this Generation Z is going to honestly make every generation to come Gen Free, in my opinion. But that requires active participation from all of us. So I know it feels overwhelming. It can feel daunting to take that first step into activism and getting your name and your face and your reputation out there associated with this stuff. But start really, really small. Put one sticker on your water bottle or one button on your backpack. And then you'll feel a little more courageous.
Stickers. We don't even make bumper stickers anymore, because it's like, why bother? Just put it on your laptop.
Seriously, it's that simple.
We need to merge the Turning Point Socialism Sucks bumper sticker with the pro-life gen, because one of the things that I'm going to be talking with Charlie about in an upcoming podcast episode is about how the solution that we're seeking as this pro-life generation, we have what we call the post-Roe blueprint of how we're trying to transform our nation so no woman ever again feels like she has to choose between the life of her child and her education. The solution is not socialism. And I'm like, we need a pro-life bumper sticker. Like, the pro-life solution is not, because I have had so many conversations with young pro-lifers recently who have fallen into oh, well, I care about people. I don't want, a woman to, be forced to go to work, 2 days after she gives birth. And she needs to have the help and support from her community. And so she can continue working and support her child. So she doesn't choose abortion. So therefore she needs free blank, blank, and blank. And it's just socialism. And we're trying to balance our compassion for the preborn and their mothers, but we also need to be, the solution is prescribing economic philosophy that works, and doesn't lead to the results that every single country that's adopted communism endures.
And that word compassion too is so important, because it is compassionate to be conservative and it is compassionate to be pro-life. So go out there on your campus today or on Zoom. So sorry for all of you who are still on Zoom University. That's painful. And have a big smile on your face and treat people with love and compassion and respect and joy every day. And the way that you live your life every day as a pro-lifer is going to inspire so many other people to walk down that same path.
Yeah. Well, this is great. Thank you so much, Isabel, for coming on. It's so great to have you come and represent Turning Point USA. I know we had a guest last season we talked about Turning Point, but it's really great to see what you guys are doing there on campuses, and would love to do more with you guys because a lot of times we're all in this together on campuses when there's a Students for Life group, a Turning Point group, a YAF group, a CR group. There's not that many of us, and so we have to band together. And actually it's very strategically smart to band together sometimes as well.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
When it comes to requesting money for events. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for all you're doing. And best of luck with your book. And thank you all for coming today and spending a little bit of time with Isabel and I to talk about how to have difficult conversations on your campus. I hope this was helpful and encouraging for you. If you ever run into a problem on your campus, whether you feel like it's a professor who's treating you unfairly, you all know if your administration, bans you or tells you not to host an event, or you can only host an event if you're willing to pay for security, you need to email our team at Students for Life immediately, info@studentsforlife.org. That email will go directly to our team, and we will get it up to our general counsel and our legions of pro-life lawyers spread out across the country who are willing to help you on campus. Do not be afraid. We've got your back. Thanks, guys.